trapped at home with an abuser. 84% of our world population profess to have faith. So the good news is, as faith-based communities in touch with grassroots wherever we are well placed to lead by example through prayer, compassion, support and action. For the past 7 years, gender-based violence and domestic abuse has been a top priority focus for Mothers Union. And it has been an interesting, uplifting and sometimes disturbing journey. One unexpected barrier has been language. What exactly is gender-based violence, and how could gender-based equality possibly be its root cause? Why are women much more affected than men? And what about alcoholism, poverty, stress, mental health? Aren't they the root of this? Well, let's ask ourselves the question. Does everybody who is stressed resort to physical violence? No. Does everybody who is poor resort to domestic abuse? No. Therefore, these things are not root causes, but contributory factors. So to clarify, gender equality signifies that the different behaviours, aspirations and needs of women and men are considered, valued and favoured equally. It is having a round table approach where everybody comes to the table with different gifts but valued equally. This is important, but frequently misinterpreted concept that is at the root of all gender-based violence. And violence, as we know, is gender-based when it is directed against somebody because they are a male, because they're a female. And unfortunately, gender-based violence affects women and girls disproportionately. But aren't men and boys abused too? Yes, of course. And whatever abuse is, there is accompanying trauma and a set of survival skills at work. As people of faith, we abhor violence against all, but we need to grasp the extent of the widespread, devastating, disproportionate effect of violence on women and girls. Today, experience tells us that violence against women is as pervasive in Irish society as it was 25 years ago. In these COVID times, the escalation of domestic violence worldwide has rightly been declared a shadow pandemic. Globally, pre-COVID, 1 in 3 women experienced some form of gender-based violence compared to 1 in 6 men. In this shadow pandemic, depending on where you live, gender-based violence and in particular domestic abuse has increased by up to 70%. 4 million girls are at risk of FGM each year. With COVID, 2 million additional cases of FGM may occur over the next decade. More than 650 million women alive were married as children. On an annual basis, 12 million girls are married before the age of 18, nearly 1 every 3 seconds. And if pre-pandemic trends continue, 150 million more girls will be married by 2030. Because of the pandemic, this is expected to increase by a further 13 million girls. And every year, up to 275 million children globally experience or witness violence in their homes. In Ireland, it is estimated that 1 in 5 women and 1 in 7 men experience abuse. 236 women have died violently since 1996, and 18 children have died alongside their mothers. In resolved cases, 1 in 2 women have been killed by a partner or ex, compared to 1 in 20 in the case of male victims. And regarding our younger generation, last year Women's Aid conducted a research with 18 to 25-year-olds and found that 1 in 5 young women and 1 in 11 young men had already experienced some form of intimate relationship abuse, including online abuse, with over half of the young abuse victims experiencing it before the age of 18. In 2020, the incidence of domestic abuse surged, with services across Ireland receiving 70% increase in visits to the website and 40% increase in calls. 3 women died in the Republic and 5 women died in the North. So domestic abuse exists in every group in the society, and even our church is not immune. Whilst domestic abuse is a specialist area that requires referral to professionals, we as a church can work to become a place of safety and support. We can be around that round table, equally challenged as men and women, tackling unjust structures in society. And interestingly, in Australia, the government works hand in hand with faith communities in a concerted effort to eliminate domestic abuse. In 2018, two separate church-related research studies undertaken in the UK and Ireland show that churches rarely speak to the issue of domestic abuse. Most churchgoers have never heard a sermon on the topic or feel their church is adequately equipped to deal with the disclosure of domestic abuse. In Ireland, 1 in 7 respondents had experienced domestic abuse, and both studies significantly reveal that almost 1/3 to 1/4 of people within our churches are affected in some way by domestic abuse. During COVID, Mothers Union has been working in the background and on the ground to provide immediate supports and towards collaboration with other church organisations with a view to devising long-term supports and strategies. In Uganda, Mothers Union delivered radio shows and TV programmes to raise awareness of gender-based violence and the rise of cases during the pandemic. A pastor from one village was found hiding 25 girls below the age of 18. He was arrested and the girls returned to their parents, and Mothers Union are now supporting the families in overcoming this trauma. In Myanmar, members ran online Zooming for facilitators as part of their parenting programme and included a module on gender-based violence awareness. In DR Congo, they put together a programme to train gender champions to work with their churches and community leaders to help address the problem and support households affected. They highlighted the importance of proper hygiene practices, and members made masks and trained others in making masks. Back in Ireland, Mothers Union kept in close touch with refugees in the 12 dioceses to determine their immediate needs. Our refuge outreach isn't just confined to Mothers Union members. In parishes where the outreach to refugees is encouraged as a whole parish intergenerational activity, the response is astounding. Currently, we are lobbying politicians. When a parent and children leave an abusive situation, they are generally, in effect, homeless. We discovered that refugees in the Republic are not treated as homeless providers as in Northern Ireland. In practice, when an emergency refuge spaces are full, the refugees must go through a series of hopes to find accommodation and the relevant funding. This is valuable time and effort that could be better placed in supporting survivors. Whilst the situation has been relaxed during COVID, and also government provision has been made so that every victim leaving an abusive situation can receive rent supplement for 3 months without a means test, this is no guarantee that these situations will last past COVID, and that is what we're working towards at present. In 2020, our All-Ireland 16 Days Prayer Vigil could not be held in person, and it was the ideal opportunity to create a 16 Days Prayer Diary. It highlighted gender-based violence, domestic abuse, theology, and the supports available across the Church of Ireland, with input from Protestant Aid, the Marriage Council, Bishop's Appeal, GFS, Mothers Union, CASC, Board for Mission, Tear Fund, and Christian Aid. In 2021, as partners in the Church, we have met together to explore, share, and support each other. Ultimately, we do hope this will lead to a holistic approach in support and raising awareness around domestic abuse and gender-based violence. So to this end, we have teamed up with Bishop's Appeal and Tear Fund to research and devise a programme that will support churches on this journey. We expect this to positively engage and assist parishes in forming a realistic and focused response to domestic abuse and gender-based violence in a local and worldwide context. In 2018, Council for Mission and Bishop's Appeal were mandated to create a justice strategy exploring many justice issues. The first issue being explored in depth is gender justice, and it is hoped that this will provide a framework for engaging in other justice issues. Mothers Union has a designated worldwide community of interest regarding domestic abuse that constantly appraises our strategies and supports. June Butler and I attended the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women in March, and it reinforced the interconnectedness of climate change, poverty, gender equality, and gender-based violence, and above all, the need for action, which doesn't have to be big. Small can be effective. So, for example, in 2 dioceses, we offer assemblies and workshops to Leaving Cert, certificate and A-level students. And a simple and useful support is to place a poster from your local refuge on the church notice board and leave a pack of little cards with the details of your nearest refuge or with the national free phone hotline number visible on a table for picking up. Knowledge is understanding. So it is worthwhile exploring and discovering as much as we can about domestic abuse and gender-based violence. Keep an eye on media for developments. Laws are only as good as their implementation, and sometimes they take gentle prodding. An invitation to a speaker from a domestic abuse service or relevant organisation like Critical is very enlightening. Another immensely powerful way to engage discussion is to host a Souls of Our Shoes exhibition. The shows feature comments from those who've walked away from abuse, and Souls of Our Shoes with its accompanying materials is available on loan to any church or community group. In 2019, we took on the World Council of Churches initiative, Thursdays in Black, towards a world without rape and violence. Wearing black on Thursdays is a simple gesture and an effective means of highlighting abuse in our communities. And for me, it is also a weekly reminder to pray and the need to respond and act. Recently, we have been in touch with Corrymeela, and I believe Eunice had a conversation with the Methodist Church, who are developing a theology, Corrymeela are developing a theology resource. And we've had conversations with Restored, who work closely with churches in their response to domestic abuse and have an excellent church pack. One of their practical suggestions is the creation of a domestic abuse charter, which indicates we are a safe church, we understand the problem, we support you, and we seek a better way forward. They also run courses to support individuals, clergy, and church communities. Mothers Union is a member of Side by Side, which is a growing global movement of people of faith who want to see gender justice become a reality across the world. They have an outstanding set of links to videos and resources. And finally, there's lots to do and lots to think about. So hats off to all the positive work that is engagement that is going on in our churches and community, and particularly to Women's Aid, Men's Aid, Critical, and all other associated domestic abuse services who are doing a brilliant job. Wouldn't it be wonderful to say sooner rather than later, hooray, we don't need to highlight domestic abuse or gender-based violence in our communities. It is a thing of the past. We can't take heart because communities are transformed one step at a time. And when we act together as a whole church family in step with God, we know amazing things happen. So let's be encouraged to get out there, to work together and to shine our light to make our homes and churches safe places. Thank you very much.
Jackie, thank you so much. I'm going to give us a moment to pause. The slides you shared were wonderful, and I think you're going to make those slides available. So if anyone does want them, we can circulate that. We have your name on our email. We can share that with you if you're happy to. But can I maybe give us just a moment to pause on that, to process a moment of it, and then I'm going to hand over to Kelly in just a moment to put that in the context maybe of an initiative she's working with. So we'll give ourselves 20 seconds just to be quiet together. All right, Kelly, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks so much, Rob. And I don't know how to follow Jackie because she's just incredible. So I am going to share a screen with you now with my presentation, and that will hopefully allow me to do that. I don't know if Scott is able to allow that to happen.
Rob may have to make you a co-host because he's the principal host. He's the king of hosts. I'm just assistant host tonight.
Thank you.
I think you're co-host now. Give it a go and see if it works.
Super. That's perfect. Thank you very much.
You're muted again there, Kelly. Sorry, I don't know how that happened.
So thank you very much. So I'm going to begin with who I am and how I came to be doing the work that I'm currently doing. I have been working with St. Patrick's Cathedral as community officer since 2016. And the tagline for the community department there is link and liaise, engage and inquire, act and address, dream and do. And I dream big. And anybody who's worked with me knows that, you know, usually the projects turn into much bigger initiatives than initially envisaged, which is exactly what happened with Criticall. During the pandemic, I was obviously laid off because the cathedral lost all sources of income because it's completely reliant on tourism, particularly with the roof project underway. That was quite a challenging year. So I was laid off in September, but the Ivy Trust very readily adopted me alongside Criticall, which they had partnered with from the get-go. And I'll come to that in more detail later. The rising tide lifts all boats really is the initiative that, or the tagline that I use for the work with the Ivy Trust, because it's about improving the quality of life for all people who live within the community of the Ivy Trust, but also those surrounding it. I'm DLP in St. Patrick's Cathedral, so I would have had some safeguarding issues over the years where I would have had to support people with appropriate referrals and the Verger team responding to various needs that arises from time to time. And some of that included domestic violence and experience from people who would have engaged with the cathedral. I'm also part of the Dublin 8 Refugee Community Sponsorship. I'm a group member with that, and we're about to support and welcome a family into Ireland. We're arriving imminently. And I suppose that new community members coming into Ireland, it's quite common to experience domestic abuse, and that sometimes relates back to cultural differences and perhaps changes in differences in legislation. I'm also a board member of St. Patrick's Cathedral Grammar School. I work with Spirit Radio as a volunteer, music and chat show host, and that's been on pause because of the pandemic as well, because I haven't been in studio. And Public Participation Network, which is the PPN, you might be familiar with that. I'm on the Local Community Development Committee, and I'm also a +1 mentor with the YMCA in Dublin, working with young people who are at risk or have been presented with needs. So I'm going to pose a question to you now, and just for reflection for you personally. If a friend revealed to you that they were experiencing difficulties in their home, how would you be likely to respond to that? Just right now, based on the knowledge that you have, whether that's extensive or perhaps previous experience, maybe no experience or understanding of it. Just think about how you might respond. A family member, a friend, a colleague, a parishioner. And it is quite a challenge. We'll just let that sit. And we'll think back to pre-COVID life. In St. Patrick's Cathedral in December 2019, we had over 100 members of the Forget-Me-Nots choir in for a sing session, a concert. It was incredibly beautiful. Christchurch Cathedral regularly held interfaith impact. And there's then the impact of COVID just wiped out all of that. You can see St. Catherine's Church is there as well. And we would have had donations coming in from people all over with the Helping Handbags appeal, for instance. We looked for 600 and we got 3,000. And they were handbags that were filled with what you might need if you'd literally walked away from everything and you had no personal care items. And it was to combat period poverty, hygiene poverty, and give somebody a little bit of dignity with perhaps a new bag and everything in it dedicated to that person. Christchurch and Celbridge is my parish church, and they have been instrumental in Criticall as well. And obviously all of that has fallen by the wayside with COVID. So I was sitting at home, working from home, when I was relegated to the home office and thinking about the context of community, when all of those connections that were so important and so really central to supporting people, how could I possibly be an effective community officer? How could I reach people through my home? And I had a conversation with Edwina Dewart at Dublin City Volunteer Centre, and we discussed a number of issues. And we reached out to Safe Ireland, and we built this idea of Criticall. So the logo that has been created is the one you see there with the green roof on it. And I suppose the roof is literally about shelter. But it's also about putting a lid on things, that enough is enough. When that was emerging as something in March, April time, as something that was definitely a risk to the most vulnerable in our society, women and children, we wanted to remind people that we were still here and we were still available to them. And the image of people together with the embrace is a virtual embrace. And we all know how much we've missed that embrace. But this logo was created by somebody who was on placement with us from, he was from Spain actually, Diego Jose Garcia Garrido, and he donated his time to this. Criticall is an acronym, which is Community Response Team Call. So we were literally putting the call out to other people, and we thought about who might be instrumental in making this work. Dublin City Volunteer Centre obviously had a lot of people, 26,000 people in fact, who had signed up to volunteer from home, and many hadn't got a role. Serve the City Dublin have such an array of volunteers signed up, and they have been really important as a partner in this. Brad Wilmot has been the administrator, looking after the management of offers of help. An Garda Síochána in Kevin Street were our #1 distributor. First of all, they're a uniform presence. They're qualified in the area of dealing with vulnerable adults. And they were the ones who did the distribution, and specifically now Inspector Ian Lamb. He was sergeant at the time and he's been promoted. And although he's now relocated in Crumlin Station, he's still involved on a regular basis. And obviously the Cathedral was the initiating organisation. So Safe Ireland were a very natural partner for us to choose to work with. The launch was on the 3rd of June, but we worked very closely with Safe Ireland before we launched this. Obviously you can see the Cathedral was literally wrapped and ensconced in scaffolding, and that's all beginning to peel away as we emerge from COVID. But you could see the array of partners that are represented there. On the left in the stripy top is Edwina Dewart, and she's the manager of the Dublin City Volunteer Centre. And then you have Chief Inspector Michael McNulty, you have Dean Morton, Lord Mayor Tom Brabazon, Nobby Hanlon from the Ivy Trust, Ian Lamb, and one of the centre managers from one of the Safe Ireland locations. Now, they have 39 services throughout the country, and we thought about very critically about what might be required for people. And one of the first things is a home, and Jackie related to this earlier on and referred to it actually about the fact that people are rendered homeless, and refuges had to shrink their services. No common areas were facilitated or allowed, and so we had to look at finding new spaces for people anywhere in Ireland. That you could provide a second home that was self-contained. Second offering or request from volunteers was to donate household items that were essential for people who had walked away from everything they owned. And also in that we looked for home starter packs, that people who were ready to move on from refuge into a new safe home, should they find one, were literally provided for with duvets, tea towels, pots, pans, cups, cutlery, utensils, you name it. The third request was writing letters of support. Now, that artwork on the left-hand side was donated by a lady called Susan, but we had literally hundreds of letters from all over the world. We had families sitting down when children were doing artwork, and discussions took place around family dinner tables where people talked and considered about relationships, what works, what doesn't work, what to do when things are not working. And the response from people was just incredible. Those letters of hope were looking to create a book. And in fact, Lord Mayor Hazel Chu, who I met today, is looking at a publisher for us. I mentioned earlier on how important our volunteers are. They have been incredible. Our volunteers not only pack up and prepare donations to deliver into us, but they also manage the space. So we have Carol and Nicola, who would be hub supervisors and facilitating. But then you have the people who sit down and take the time at home to either shop online and order in or whatever. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes thought, it takes consideration. And some of the notes that have come in with the donations have been incredible. This is a distribution day. You can see on the right-hand side there, the lady on the right is a superstar, and I'm delighted to say she's with us today, Olive Harris, and she's from Skerries, and she's from the town of Skerries, but would have travelled on the train and had quite a cohort of people who she calls upon. And even while level 5 restrictions have been in place, she's arrived in on a monthly basis with carloads of donations that have really made sure that even in the height of restrictions, we've been able to keep going. So this was the Easter egg run, and the Gardaí distributed 240 Easter eggs to everybody who was living in refuge. Salbridge Parish opened up, and Reverend Stephen Neal is here with us today as well, the local rector in Salbridge, and they gave us use of the slip hall, and Dee Huddleston was one of the key volunteers there, making sure that the Kildare and Rathcoole and Tala refuges got exactly what they needed. And on the top left-hand side, you can actually see the school appeal that we did in September when children were going back to school, and that really relieved pressure from people. Louth and Cork hubs got up and running pretty quickly. And I can't underestimate, none of us can underestimate the value of vouchers. And I have to mention here specifically Kiltiernan Parish, who donated €3,000 worth of vouchers. And the dignity of choice in a circumstance when choices are very limited is just incredibly important. And so whilst we had an appeal for specific items, there's nothing more beautiful than giving somebody the choice of what they want to prioritize, whether that is clothing or food or personal care supplies or whatever. So the back-breaking end of this is the stockroom, which is in Elvedon House in the Ivy Trust in Cork Street. And it is a very tightly managed space. It is a very small space. It's probably no less than, or no more than 300 square meters. It is relatively very small. It's billed maybe 3-4 times a week. We also have a food flag program that comes in here, and you can see some donors arriving in here. And the lady on the right hand side, the blonde lady, is Carol Lovelet, who is from Serve the City. But we've also had corporate support, donations from Verizon that came from the staff appeal, space at Dublin, the Business Enterprise Centre. They organised an appeal through their offices. The Rolling Donut Company sent out treats at Christmas, and that went not only to the Critical initiative, but also to people living in direct provision. And so really, Critical is all about sharing love with each other. And with Safe Ireland, they've been looking at No Going Back is their report, and this is a copy of it here, a Safe Ireland discussion paper, reflecting on the impact of all of these initiatives and all of the learning that comes through this. And I suppose Winston Churchill, never let a good crisis go to waste. Well, this is really a learning curve. We have learned so much through the pandemic. In the No Going Back report, this is the journey that they have mapped out for women exiting domestic abuse. And it also applies to men, but probably disproportionately more likely to women. The journey is complicated. It is not easy. It is not simple. And so the practical supports that we've been able to provide relieve some of the pressure on the key working staff who have to liaise with all the legal supports that are required, the Gardaí, the work opportunities, the education, the financial strain that people are under. And whilst we were able to relieve some of it, this is a much bigger piece of work, and we're only a tiny part of that. Children have such a complicated journey to well-being. On the left-hand side, it's really quite shocking to look at the impact on children. Triangulation, direct target, the child is the aggressor, cultural abuse, human trafficking, tangential coercion. And that's a really difficult journey to navigate for a young person who isn't fully formed to be tied up in all of this complicating circumstance. So media coverage has been wide and varied. It's across many platforms. It's on all social media channels. The Dublin and Glendalough dioceses, the major media newspapers have covered. Critical Cork are extremely active on social media. But I suppose I asked a question at the beginning of this conversation, and this now is a challenge, reflecting back on your earlier answer. If a friend revealed to you that they were experiencing difficulties in the home, how would you be likely to respond? Has your answer changed since I began speaking? Now is a time for action. So the new challenge is, what one action, if any, do you now feel in a position to take in order to support societal change in relation to the experience of domestic, sexual and gender-based violence? One action in your locus of control. It might be something very simple, but is there one that you know you can take today or tomorrow or this weekend or next week or next month? And it's the ripple effect of that change that I see as being a possibility. Support is incredibly important. 999 or 112 in an emergency or life-threatening circumstance, or if you're in danger or someone else is in danger. It is incredibly important to reach out for that help and not to be afraid to do it. Let nothing stop you, because there's nothing worse than silence around this, and we must break the silence. On Safe Ireland's website there, which is on the bottom, there is a Get Help page, which applies to both male support services and female support services. I have to say, without every single person who has been party to this, there are incredible numbers. The project that we've leveraged throughout since the 3rd of June has turned around no less than 400 to 500,000 euros worth of produce, supports, vouchers. So it's just incredible. Over 2,000 volunteer hours, more than 500 volunteers, individual volunteers, and an unbelievable movement of change. So for each one of you and your part and your time here today, I'd like to say a huge thank you, and what a privilege it is. Back to you, Rob.
Kelly, thank you so much. I feel with both of you this evening, there's just been a wonderful wave of energy and information, and I thank you both for that. Before we do ask, I'd like to invite people to ask you questions, but the same thing, I think it's important to give ourselves just 20 seconds to process and be quiet together. So let's take our 20 seconds, and then we'll have a little bit of questions and answers from anyone who might like to. So let's be quiet.